Hello and welcome to Lewis Nichols Live Stories in association with Shane Solomon, and excited to bring on our next guest today, Anne Widdecombe. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And you?
You're very good. Thank you for coming down. You've been in Cornwall now for a couple of days. You've done Heligan. You're going to the beach today. So have you enjoyed it so far?
I have, but then I am half Cornish.
You are? I know. I was quite surprised.
So, half Cornish and half Devonian.
And you do the cream tea the correct way.
I do a cream tea the Cornish way, even though I live in Devon, yes.
So today we're going to go on a little bit of a journey, kind of your career, which is, it's split almost in two, because we've got the political side and, of course, the TV side, and you've done a lot.
And the writing, don't forget the writing.
You've done a lot. So we're going to cover everything today, so hopefully. So I want to go back to the very beginning, which is kind of growing up for you. So what was your childhood like? Were you from a close-knit family?
Yes, but we were a family that moved around a lot, because my father was with the Admiralty. And in those days, it was called the Admiralty, not the MOD brackets naval or whatever. And so we moved around with the Navy every 2 to 3 years. We're on different naval bases. And so one day I'd be living in a house which I'd been in for 2 or 3 years, having friends I'd known that long, going to a particular school, belonging to the local brownie pack. And the very next day, I mean, no transition, very next day, I'd either be in a different part of the country or on my way to a different part of the globe. Preparing to get used to a new house, a new school, a new brownie pack, and to make friends again from scratch. So it was a childhood which I think prepared me for future life, so that I always knew that when something was gone, it had really gone. Which was how, and I know we'll come to this much later, when I left Westminster, I was able to say, right, that's gone. Yeah. Now I can do things that I wouldn't have dreamt of doing while I was there.
You know, moving around so much, obviously you would form, I guess, friendships and connections with people, but then you have to move and do that again. Did that ever kind of hinder you in a sense? No, not at all.
No, I think it was, I mean, obviously, I didn't realise it at the time, but I think the subconscious lesson of that childhood was that when the past is the past, and all the things that were so vivid yesterday, the house, the friends, the school, which was all so much a part of life yesterday, was gone and it wasn't coming back. And I think, that adjusted me for later life.
Did you go to school in Singapore at some point? That's incredible. So you did move around.
Oh, yes. My brother was born in Gibraltar.
Wow.
And I spent some of my childhood in Singapore,
So with the politics side of everything, when did you first kind of have a passion and a love for politics? What's your kind of earliest memory?
Early teens, because when I was growing up, it was the height of the Cold War, and the world was divided into two great conflicting political ideologies, communism versus capitalism. And in individual Western countries, it wasn't communism, it was socialism versus capitalism. But it really was socialism, it wasn't Tony Blair, it was real socialism. And so everybody was on one side or the other. Nobody said to you in those days, it doesn't make any difference, because everybody knew it made a huge difference. And so people were very engaged, and the young were particularly engaged, and so was I.
So how do you then turn that kind of a passion and an interest into a career, which we all know now for many decades you've been part of? So when was that transition when you thought, do you know what, I'm actually going to go ahead and do this as a career?
Oh, again, early. I mean, I went to Oxford specifically because I wanted to go into politics. I wanted to do the Oxford Union. I wanted to make the contacts. I wanted to do all the, not just the politics course, but I wanted to do all the things that go with politics at Oxford or Cambridge.
And then when was your first job? So your first paid political job?
Political job?
Yeah, so when you were in the world of politics as a
that would have been when I actually got into Parliament. I mean, all my political jobs until that point were decidedly unpaid. They were all the voluntary side of the party. So from the moment I left university, I tried to build a political career. So I was a local councillor in Runnymede. I held first branch, then constituency, then area, and finally national positions in the party. And it was all being built up towards that end.
So what do you do in the meantime? So obviously, if it's not paid, how do you...
Oh, you do a job.
So you have regular jobs?
No, don't look like that, of course. I mean, all politicians come from some job that they've previously been doing. A lot of them are lawyers, of course. And I, first of all, worked with Unilever.
Wow.
And then after Unilever, I worked for London University, not on the academic side, on the admin side. And then in 1987, after 2 previous attempts, I got into Parliament.
How does that feel when you have the backing of your constituents, essentially, when people actually have the faith and say, we're voting you in? Is that a big moment?
That is a very big moment, yes. You get used to it because in those days, at any rate, you weren't parachuted into seats because you were a woman or because you were an ethnic or whatever it might be. You actually had to earn it. And so the first seat I fought was Burnley in Lancashire. And of course, it's a real test because I had to go up there every weekend at your own expense. So in those days, there was no help at all. And you get to know a constituency and you get used to people supporting you or doing the opposite. And then the next one I fought was actually down this way. It was Devonport when David Owen was the MP. So it was a very big, a very public campaign because it was his first as leader of the Social Democrat Liberal Alliance. So it was almost like a by-election. It was an interesting campaign. And then by the time I got to Maidstone, I was used to it.
You say there that you obviously had to earn it.
Yeah.
Are you saying now you don't think it's that as much?
These days, and it's why we have now such a low-quality Parliament on both sides of the House. I mean, it's really low. And it is because for about 25 years now, the major parties, at any rate, have selected by identity rather than merit. And I've actually seen this up close, firsthand. So they give priority to women, to people of ethnic origin, to gays, to whatever it might be. They're interested in quotas. Now, in our day, it was merit. And, the women had to take on the men and they had to beat the men. There was no question of, you get special treatment. The result was, you had your Thatchers, and on the other side of the house, you had your Shirley Williams, you had your Barbara Castles. You had people of real substance. And, I think of the big chancellors of those times, people like Nigel Lawson. I mean, you look round now, and there's nobody of that quality in the House of Commons because they've come through a completely different route. And I think the worst manifestation is, and the Tories have an A-list, so I mean, I criticise them as well. But the worst manifestation is the Labour Party's all-women shortlist. So if you're a man who's lived in a particular constituency all your life, you've been to school there, you've brought up your own children and sent them to school there, you've used the local hospitals, you've made an impact in the community, oh no, you can't stand for the seat because it's reserved for a woman. That, to my mind, is a complete nonsense, and it's what guarantees low quality. And the first time that we had women as a result of positive discrimination was Tony Blair's first Parliament. We could all tell who they were. We used to sit there on our side shouting out positive discrimination because they simply just didn't perform like the others performed. And I vividly remember about 6 months after they all came, 101 of them, you might as well have had 101 Dalmatians, quite honestly. So 101 of these new female MPs come in on the Labour side. And one of them came up to me in a corridor in the Commons and she said, Anne, isn't it horrible how the men are so rude to us? And I said, yes. And isn't it horrible how they're so rude to each other? And she hadn't thought of that. She'd just been roughed up in the chamber. She thought it was because she was a woman. In fact, it was because she was useless.
So people watching this now, we've just heard you say that you've seen it yourself, that happens. People are chosen.
Yeah.
So what have you seen that for you makes you think that is happening categorically?
Oh, categorically. It's in the party rules. And I was at a selection meeting when the selection committee wanted to put 4 people on the shortlist, 3 men, 2 women. 3 men, 1 woman. They were told they couldn't do that. They had to have 2 men, 2 women. And we said, well, hang on, the next woman down is a long way back. There are men in between. No. So I said, are you telling us, and I actually said this to the central office agent, Tory central office agent. I said, are you telling us we can't select on merit? And he was very honest. He said, yes. And I said, okay, supposing we do. He said, I'll invalidate the selection.
Wow.
So I've seen it. I've seen it at first hand.
Yeah, it's good, 'cause it's good to get your opinion on that because people will hear you say that, but actually if you can describe what you've witnessed, it actually gives it some context.
Yeah. Those are the rules. We had to have an equal number of men and women on the shortlist. That was the rule.
Yeah.
So, never mind merit. If all the women had been absolutely hopeless, which they weren't, but if all the women had been absolutely hopeless, it wouldn't have mattered. You still had to have an equal number.
Going back to when you were first elected, you had this reputation as being quite formidable, outspoken. You would say it as it is, and you took no nonsense from anybody. And you had this reputation almost that of Margaret Thatcher. She was somebody that people considered didn't take any nonsense. Did you like getting that reputation quite early on?
It just happened. As far as I was concerned, there is no point in having a belief if you don't state it. What is the point? There's no point in hedging round. And, occasionally you have to be careful how you say things because there are sensitivities involved, but you still say what you think.
And you definitely have done that.
Well, I've done that all the time, yeah.
In your political career, what's your proudest moment? So when you look back at something, does something jump out?
Well, everybody always expects me to say something that happened on the front bench, some piece of legislation or whatever it was. But one of my best moments didn't come in any front bench context. I was a minister at the time, but I was acting solely as a constituency MP when I got one of my constituents out of jail in Morocco. Now, by that, I got him released. I didn't spring him from jail in Morocco. But when his wife came to see me, he'd been convicted, he'd been sentenced, he'd lost his appeal, and he was facing 9 years in a Moroccan jail for a crime that not even the Moroccans really believed he'd committed. And I thought, what am I supposed to do about this? I can't interfere in the courts in this country, never mind in somebody else's country. Anyway, I went through all the ambassadors and got exactly where I expected to get, which was nowhere at all. So then, as the last throw of a dice that I was convinced was irretrievably loaded against me, and I really only did it to convince the wife that no stone had been left unturned, I went out to Rabat and I saw the King's Counsellor, the Justice Minister, the Interior Minister, anybody else I could think of. And to cut a very long story short, 9 months into that 9-year sentence, I was able to phone up his wife and say, John's out, he's with the ambassador, he'll be home in 48 hours. And her reaction, when she finally took in what I told her, told me why it was that I'd become a member of Parliament. And I think the sad thing is this, on both sides of the House and in all parties, big parties and very tiny parties, most MPs, maybe not quite all, but certainly the vast majority of MPs, can point to such moments when they were where they were and did what they did. It didn't make a trickle of difference to the nation, they didn't make a drop of difference to the constituency, but they made a tidal wave of difference to an individual family. And I think the sad bit is that most people think we're lazy, sleazy, and in it for ourselves.
Well, one thing I don't think people can accuse you of is being lazy, because, going back to when you were Minister of State for Prisons, you visited every single prison in the UK. Now, that's very hands-on. So, first of all, I don't know if you can remember, because I don't have the information. How many did you visit?
135.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you went in there, what was your first reaction? Was there something immediate where you thought, okay, I need to invest some time in this and we need to change?
No, when I went in, I had to see some prisons, and the first thing I saw was Holloway, and then Whitemoor, which was a terrible Category A prison in those days up in the Fens, from where there had been a famous escape. It housed a lot of IRA prisoners. I just started visiting. Then I said, well, I must visit different sorts of prisons. So I must visit an open prison. I must visit a very small prison. I must visit a large one. Visit a remand prison, which are very different from the other prisons. And just gradually, first of all, we got 50 and they made me a special cake and celebrated 50, but that sort of just happened. I never said I'm going to 50 prisons. And then much later on, it became 100. And then somebody said, you've got to go for the lot.
You did.
You're the first one to do it. So, yes. But it just happened gradually. It wasn't an aim when I went in.
Well, we've got Bodmin Jail tomorrow, so we're going to add one to the list for you. What was it like being part of John Major's government? So do you have fond memories with working with him?
Yeah. John was a very different character from Margaret Thatcher. And I'm a huge admirer of Margaret Thatcher. But the way I always illustrate the difference between them is the way they used to come through the lobbies. Now, I'm sure all your viewers know, but just for the tiny handful that don't. The way that MPs vote in the House of Commons is you walk through 2 long corridors called the lobbies, either side of the chamber, and one is for ayes and one is for noes. You go in at one end, you go through, and when you come out at the other, you give in your name, and at that point, and only at that point, you've voted. So, by the way, if you find yourself in the wrong lobby, you just stay in there. You don't go out and vote.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you do it. So nobody hurries through the lobbies because it's the one time of the day when the whole party's together. And so people are looking for ministers or spokesmen if you're in opposition. They're looking for fellow MPs. They're looking for other people. The one time of the day you can find them. And so nobody comes through the lobbies at any great speed and everybody's standing round. Now, the way Mrs. Thatcher is to come through the lobbies was that her PPS went in front of her. It was like the parting of the Red Seas, you know, and then Moses came through and voted. John Major, I mean, I'm sure his PPS was with him, but he certainly never went in front of him. And John used to go up to one person and say, great speech you made the other night. He used to go up to somebody else and say, is your wife out of hospital? Did it go okay? And he did this the whole way through, even at the height of all the pressure on that beleaguered premiership. Even when our majority was down to 2, we were beset by sleaze scandals, we were riven apart over Maastricht. You'd think any PM would just want to get through the lobbies. Never came through any other way.
Do you keep in touch with him?
Occasionally, yes. Yes, there's the annual Christmas card, obviously, but occasionally we do keep in touch.
Wow.
We would have been on completely different sides of the argument over Brexit, but... yeah.
I mean, with you, you had so much popularity, especially with the public. I mean, I've been watching videos and it's quite something. So there were talks of you becoming the party leader.
Yeah.
And from a public point of view, it made sense because you had the support. So why did that never happen?
It didn't happen because I didn't have the support at Westminster.
Okay.
And it's as simple as that. And the way that the Tory party selection worked then and now is that it's the MPs who reduce the list to 2. And then the 2 go out to the country for the final say. Now, if it had been the other way round and the country had selected the final 2, nothing would have stopped me trying.
So why did you not have their support? What do you think it was?
I think they thought me odd.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because, I mean, I say what I think, and that's it.
And they consider that odd?
Well, I think, I think they didn't think I was the right fit.
And another thing I've noticed with being a politician, it's very intrusive. People really want to look at your private life, your personal life, your expenses. Do you think that's fair, that politicians get that kind of scrutiny? Not
altogether. I mean, if you come into public life, you do expect to come under the microscope, and if you don't, you're a fool and you shouldn't be doing it. But what has changed, and has definitely changed since I was there, since I first went in, is that now families come under the microscope. And so the obvious example of that was Ewan Blair, who celebrated his GCSEs just a trifle too enthusiastically, had a little snooze in Leicester Square and came to the attention of the constabulary. If that had happened to any other young man in the entire country, he wouldn't have got 2 lines in his local paper. That poor guy had banner headlines because his father was the Prime Minister. So if you've got anybody in the family who's had a difficulty that you don't want rehearsed, or you've got anybody who's a bit vulnerable, or even a spouse saying, actually, darling, I don't relish the loss of privacy on quite that scale, you don't do it. And that is one of the reasons why there has been a decline in the standard of MP, is that serious people are not going to come into a profession which is regularly held up to ridicule, where every bus ticket and pencil that you might purchase is examined and big things in the press, where your family is badly intruded on, where your kids will be berated in the playground because of something you've said. People won't do it. And that's why we're losing the serious people. When I went into Parliament, it was 1987, wasn't the dark ages, it was 87. I went into Parliament, we had a brain surgeon on the Labour side, we had a consultant gynaecologist on our side, and we took it for granted that that was the level at which Parliament recruited. You look round now, you just don't see it.
Yeah, well, you gave us a little insight, really, when you did I think it was 2002, the Louis Theroux documentary, and we've really got a good insight into what you actually do and how busy, how chaotic at times. When that whole idea was approached and it was pitched to you, were you ever sceptical about letting people in and seeing that side?
Yes, I was very sceptical because I didn't altogether trust Louis Theroux. But I was prepared to do it. I was at a point of change. If I'd seen the programme he had done with the Hamiltons, I wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot barge pole. But I didn't see that. I saw another. I can't remember what it was, but it was okay. It was okay. So I decided I would do it. And I was at that point of change where I'd left the front bench. And so, the rest of my time in Parliament was going to be different. And I thought, yes, okay. Yes, I remember now the one I saw. It was Paul Daniels and Debbie McGee.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And, that was a point of change piece. And so I thought, yes, it's all right. It's fairly similar. But it wasn't. He was intrusive. He broke agreements that we had. For example, I told him at her request, not at mine, that he must not interview my mother unless I was present. Well, he did.
Yeah.
He just chose a moment when he knew that I was signing books, so I was occupied. And he chose that moment to go and interview my mother. She didn't even know she was being interviewed.
Because your mum featured on the documentary, and she's very cheeky, she was very charming, and you had a good relationship. And it was nice to see that side. And Louis, of course, he was asking some questions about, did she want you to find love and stuff?
That's
and it was
right,
very personal. So were you protective of your mum being exposed to that?
Yes, very. From the moment she came to live with me, and she came to live with me when my father died, so she came in 1999, and she was with me until 2007 when she died. And from the moment she came to live with me, obviously she met my friends, she met a lot of politicians, they came to the house, we had conferences in the house. But she always said that she didn't want anything to do with the press. And of course they used to ring up. And she was very sharp in the early days, very sharp, and she knew precisely, that they were press. And she used to say, "Are you a journalist?" And if they said yes, she'd say, "I'm sorry, I can't talk to him, put the phone down."
So when your mum sadly passed, obviously it seems like you were very close. That must have been a very tough time for you.
Well, it was a predictable time. One of the things you just know is that if you have elderly parents, there is going to come a time when you lose them. And I was very fortunate in both my parents. They were both fairly fit right up to the end, not the final end, but right up to nearly the end. And I had good warning.
Okay.
I had good warning. I knew that my father was going, and I knew that my mother couldn't be far off going. So, and I think if you've got the warning there, you're mentally prepared for it. And in fact, I was due to visit Nepal the very next day. I was due to visit Nepal because I was supporting the Gurkhas in their bid to be allowed to stay in the UK after 15 years service. And my mother died that night, so I couldn't go to Nepal. I remember I was packing and the carer called me and said, your mother's having difficulty breathing. And we had this discussion about whether we should, phone up and get some oxygen, and she died. But it was, as I say, if you've got warning, you can nearly always cope. It's when things just come at you. The other thing is that when parents are declining, it will be good for them when it's over. You know that. But if that doesn't apply, if you lose your parents when they're middle-aged or something, you think, well, they had all that time, why? There was never any why in my case.
Because it was tough, because then it was just, I think, 3 years later, your brother passed, and obviously you've got his Meryl here, your sister-in-law, who you're very close with, but within 3 years you lose your mum and then a brother.
The brother was different because he was only 73.
Wow.
And come on, my mother was 96 or just coming up to 96, and my father was 89. My brother was only 73, and it wasn't old age, it was illness, it was cancer. So that was different. But again, he was given a year to live, and they were right. That's the time that he did live. So again, you knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you're mentally prepared for it. Whereas if they'd rung me up and said he's just been killed in a car crash, that would have been a terrible shock.
A lot of people with Anne Widdecombe, they always say, because in public, you have this kind of energy where you're very strong, you're to the point. A lot of people don't see emotion. It's something you've always kind of kept to yourself. Do you display an awful lot of emotion behind closed doors, would you say? No.
Well, I lose my temper occasionally, if you call that emotion, yes. I don't actually admire the current trend for, as far as I'm concerned, far too much emotion. And I just don't admire that trend at all. I mean, I think what my parents' generation went through, I mean, my grandmother came up of an air raid shelter and there was no house there. Her home had been bombed and obliterated in the space of, I don't know what it was, a couple of hours. She was probably in the shelter. It had gone. My father was at sea. My mother never knew whether he'd been torpedoed or not. My mother was in Bath, which was the subject of a blitz. My father didn't know whether she'd been bombed or not. I think what that generation went through. And now the things that people get all uptight about and talk about their mental health and all this sort of thing, forget it. I actually put an enormous value on endurance.
So with what you're saying, what people went through many years ago, completely understand, but with times changing and the world changing, do you not think it's really important for people to kind of be able to be themselves and display emotion if they want to?
I think that with the times changing, the very dangerous world we're now living in, the more need there is for courage and fortitude, the more need there is. And we encourage the exact opposite these days. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of Prince William, but I think one of the stupidest things he ever said was during COVID when Prince Charles had to confine himself for 3 or 4 days. One imagines not exactly in a hovel. 3 or 4 days he had to confine himself. And William said, it's very bad for his mental health. I thought, you idiot. You idiot.
So you're not an advocate of mental health, clearly.
Oh, I mean, I'm an advocate of dealing with serious mental health issues, but not of putting every daily stress down to mental health. There is such a thing as normal stress.
You do have a very Margaret Thatcher stance.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a common sense stance.
I wanted to actually go back to why you decided to retire from politics back in 2010. Because that was a shock for people.
Was it?
Yeah, it seemed like you were something you'd always just do. It was just within your DNA to be a politician.
I'd been there for 23 years. That's the first thing. I think I got the point of exit absolutely right. If I'd gone sooner, I would have missed it. If I'd gone later, I would have been jaded. And it was precisely because I saw that coming. There is that test when, you meet the same problem for the umpteenth time. Whether you can feel the same sense of outrage that you felt when you first encountered that problem. And if you can't, then, it's probably time to look at retirement. And I always said when I lost my sense of outrage at constituents' problems, I'd probably go, and I did.
And then we're going to go into the media side later because you went out with quite a bang. But you did come back, especially for Brexit. You felt it wasn't being handled the right way and at the right speed. So who kind of persuaded you to get back into politics, or was it your decision?
It was my decision. I was getting very fed. I mean, if you'd said to me, even in January 2019, I joined the Brexit Party in April. If you'd said to me even in January, well, Anne, you're about to go back into politics, you're going to join the Brexit Party, you're going to leave the Tories, you're going to join the Brexit Party, and you're going to become a member of the European Parliament, I would have said, oh, you idiot, lie down, have an aspirin, forget it. But it happened, and the reason that it happened was that I just reached a final pitch of frustration with Brexit. The nation had voted, and Parliament didn't seem capable of delivering Brexit. And I thought I've had enough of Theresa May at that point. And I can remember exactly where I was. I was in a Norwegian fjord. I wasn't in the fjord, I was by the fjord, but it was a cruise. And it was a fjord called Flam. And I was standing in Flam, and I suddenly thought, I've really had enough. And I pulled out my phone by the fjord in Flam and phoned up Nigel Farage and said, I'd like to join your party. And there was this stunned silence on the other end of the phone, and then he got very enthusiastic.
Did that lead to you being, was it like kicked out or expelled from the Conservatives?
Oh, yes. I said, I'm not resigning, they can throw me out. Which, of course, they did, and which they had to. I mean, I joined another party. Yeah. I was going to stand against them. I didn't have a problem with that. But I said, no, I'm not resigning. They can throw me out.
They did.
And they did, yep. And then also the Carlton Club actually did not throw me out immediately, which they should have done, but they didn't. They held on for several months, and then I think there was enough pressure on them to see me off. Yep.
Do you think, when you look back, that the public were given all the information we needed when it came to voting for Brexit?
Well, you couldn't have all the information. You had to make your mind up on various principles. Sovereignty. That was my big one. I'd been a minister for 7 years in the major government, and I knew for a solid certainty that we were no longer a sovereign state. We couldn't implement some laws because Europe said no. We had to implement others because Europe said it must be so. There were times when there was a real clash between European law and ours, and I witnessed that. When people said, oh, that never happened, that jolly well did happen, and fairly regularly as well. And whatever I may have thought about Europe when I became a minister, by the time I'd finished, I wanted out. It was the sovereignty issue for me that was the big one. And I said, a nation that can't control its own borders, its own trade deals, its own laws, is not a sovereign state. And I was determined that Britain should be sovereign. And an awful lot of people voted on the sovereignty issue. I didn't necessarily think we were going to win. But when we did win, I wanted that result implemented.
And you were part of that. Yeah. You now work with Reform.
Yes.
Is it? So you is it like an advisor with immigration?
Well, I'm supposed to be the spokesman for justice and immigration.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a big.
Well, I'm not in Parliament, and as they get a bigger parliamentary presence, which I believe they will, I think that the parliamentarians will take over that sort of job, and so they should. I'm just doing it in the meanwhile because, when Reform started, we had no members of Parliament at all.
So because I'm going to be completely honest, when we announced that you were coming on the show, we had a very mixed reaction, which we've never had before, which we were speaking in the car and you said you're used to that. It's not universal. And we had people that were very excited. We had a lot of people that said, what on earth are you doing? Yeah. People have this opinion, and I'm just going to ask you the question and let you answer. So people will say Anne Widdecombe is racist. What is your comments on that?
Well, I mean, if people are going to make an allegation like that, then let them produce the evidence. I know of no reason to be called racist at all, and therefore I'm not going to defend myself because I hear no precise accusation. If what they're saying is that the mere fact that you want to control your borders makes you racist, then most of Britain is racist.
Do you think when people are escaping war and they need refuge in a safer place, do you support that?
I do not support giving asylum to people who come from safe countries. Now, when I last looked, France was a safe country. It's under the rule of law. It's a signatory to all the conventions that we're a signatory to. So why don't they apply for asylum in France? Answer, because Britain is a much softer touch. They're going to get turned down in France, they know it. Britain is a much softer touch. And I've said in every single speech I've ever made on asylum, I've said the genuine asylum seeker will always be welcome. But the definition of asylum in international law, an asylum seeker, is somebody who's suffering persecution in their own country. Not somebody who comes from a poor country, somebody who's suffering persecution in their own country. That is the definition of political asylum. And I have always said somebody comes and fulfills that criterion, that's fine. We have always accepted genuine asylum seekers. But now, people come here unlawfully from safe countries. I'm not buying that.
And with other people have said there's been comments that have been made where you've referred to a specific toy that back in the 60s and the 70s were popular.
A toy.
But do you accept that just because something maybe years ago was acceptable, that surely now if it causes offence, you can understand that you need to adapt?
I referred to it in the context of toys in a child's pram.
Yeah.
I did not refer to it in the context of a person or anything. I wouldn't do that. Good heavens, no. But I referred to it, and you still see them very occasionally in shops. Now, what are you supposed to call it? That?
Yeah.
What are you supposed to call it? You will call it by its name. Gollywog is the word you're looking for.
But what I'm trying to get at with other situations, do you agree that just because something was once acceptable doesn't mean now, and you can
on
make
its own merits? On its own merits every time.
The other one, the big one, is people. Now this is going to be tricky because I know you have a lot of gay friends. Craig is one of your closest friends, Craig River Hallwood. But people think you're homophobic because of religious reasons.
I can't help what people think. I am not responsible for what other people think. I am responsible solely for what I think, what I say, what I believe. And I once asked Ian Dale, who is an LBC presenter, who is openly gay, whom I've known for about 20 years. And I once said to him on his programme, if I believed half the things that people say I believe, would you want me on this programme? And he said no.
So if I could bring some of them that people say that you believe, one of them is conversion therapy. Do you believe that is something that should happen or could work?
There's no question of should or could. What I have said is that given that we once thought it was quite impossible for a man to become a woman or a woman a man, that it is perfectly possible that at some time in the future, and I've never suggested it's happening now, that at some time in the future, the same thing could happen with sexuality. I have no particular view on it.
Okay, so it's just something that you were saying in the future it could work.
That's exactly what I said.
But not
it's
that
there.
It should.
The interview is there to be accessed. And in fact, when a lot of people wrote to me telling me what they thought I'd said, I wrote back a one-line answer and I said, are you responding to the interview or to the media frenzy? And one or two people then did have the honesty. They went back and watched the interview and then came back to me and said, no, sorry, you didn't say that. One or two. The rest, I suspect, just...
I mean, I got a lot of bad reaction because I'm gay myself, but I know you have a lot of gay friends, and like people do, they'll pick up a part of an interview, focus on that. So what are your thoughts on gay marriage? Do you support that now?
No, I do not.
Is that just religious?
Nor do a lot of gays I know.
Yeah.
Who don't necessarily do it for religious reasons. Some of them do. But don't necessarily refuse to support it for religious reasons. They just think that marriage is between a man and a woman. And that, if you remember, was Christopher Bickam's initial reaction when he was trapped on air. They like trapping you. And was asked, and he said, just automatically said, a marriage is between a man and a woman. And of course, the whole world goes mad. But that is a lot of people's instinct.
Yes. I think it was the conversion therapy, but also you opposed to LGBT legal rights such as the same age of consent.
Yes, but actually, as I said at the time, one of the reasons why I didn't want to lower the age of consent was because I didn't think it was working for the heterosexuals.
Okay, so that was just purely...
Yeah, it's there. It's there.
And the last, because we got loads of the media stuff. We got loads of the media stuff that I want to go into, but one of the things that people really were against was your opinions on abortions. You don't support that at all.
I do not support abortion. I do not support the taking of life, unless it is to save a life, which is why I have always said that if a mother was really going to die, then that was not a matter for the state to pronounce on. But that, frankly, in this day and age, is so rare. It's minimal. But the idea that you can just take a life, and particularly in the later abortions, I was supporting a law to reduce the time limit to 18 weeks. And when you consider children survive at 23 weeks, 24 weeks, and yet we allow abortion in some circumstances, and now, of course, with what's been voted on in all circumstances, we allow abortion up to birth. Now, what is the difference? You have two children of exactly the same age and gestation. One is in a cot with all the sources of medical science being poured in to try and save it. The other one is destroyed and put in a black sack and thrown away. And what is the difference between the two? Nothing to do with the lives themselves, but to do with the mother's wish. Nobody should have that power over another life.
Do you think a woman surely has the right to decide what she does with her own body?
What about the child's body? That is the whole point. There are two patients there. There are two, not one, there are two, particularly in the later stages. Now, as I've said so many times, if abortion at later stages was confined entirely to risk to the mother, and very severe handicap, and I'm not saying I would go with that, but if that were the law, I don't think there would be any movement, as there is and on the scale it is, against it. What I think people find impossible is the idea that you take children's lives for social reasons, and that is just wrong. I stand by it.
What are your thoughts if, say, someone was sexually assaulted and resulted in a pregnancy? That person is not going to want a child to remind them every day of what they went through. So do you understand why some people
I
situation...
understand why, but I also would say it's still a child. And in fact, we made an exception when we were trying to change the law. We made an exception for severe handicap and for rape. So we made that exception. But we were always being challenged from the other side, who said, but it's still a child, and that is quite true. But we made the exception because we wanted to get the law through.
I think this is one of the things in the world. You can always agree and disagree. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. You know, I'm sat here with you now. I was with you yesterday. And as a person, you're very nice. We got on really well, and I've enjoyed your company. I think politically and on some views, we're never going to agree. That's just life. But actually, it's nice to hear you explain, because people will take various little chapters, and to hear you just say what you think and why.
Yes, but they'll do exactly the same with this interview. You don't think for one moment, do you, that the entire thing that I've said is going to be what people take. There will be a social media reaction to say that I said that children who are born as a result of rape should never be aborted, and I said, that we should never take anybody from overseas, even if they'd come from a war-torn country. You will just get rot across social media, and I know that. And this interview is not going to be an exception, Lewis.
Do you like that, though? Do you do it for that reaction?
No, I want to argue on the basis of what I believe, not what other people say I believe.
Well, I'm going to do something different with you now, because I like your opinion, and I want to know what you think of some former prime ministers. What kind, just a very short outline. So Winston Churchill.
Phenomenal.
Margaret Thatcher.
Phenomenal.
Tony Blair.
Heaven help us.
Liz Truss.
On the right lines, but tried to do too much, too soon, and with totally inadequate preparation.
Boris Johnson.
Yes. Boris Johnson. Great fun, but probably not the best prime minister we've ever had.
David Cameron.
Terrible.
Really?
Terrible.
Rishi Sunak.
I'm almost tempted to say who. He made no impact at all.
You got Shane laughing in the back there. It's never happened before. And finally, Keir Starmer.
The least said, the better, and the sooner he goes, the better.
So we know you as a media personality, and sometimes you shock everybody by doing a show where we're like, sorry, Anne's doing that. So how did you become a politician, but then kind of just a media personality? How did that happen? Because it doesn't happen for everybody. Well,
Strictly Come Dancing, for example, had come to me for 5 years. And I said, no, go away. No way, because I was an MP. But when I retired, as I've already explained earlier in the interview, I do know when the past is the past. And I knew that from the moment that Parliament was dissolved in 2010, I had no obligation to think, to act, to take decisions as though I were an MP, because I wasn't going to be an MP. I wasn't going to be some sort of honorary MP. But when I said to people in the spring of that year that in the autumn I was going to be doing Strictly after I retired, the reaction was universal. Friend and foe alike, they all said don't. And they all gave the same reason. They said, if you do that, you'll lose your gravitas. Well, actually, it was gravity I had most of the problems with on Strictly. But I said, yes, I will lose my gravitas, but what do I want it for? And they hadn't thought of that. So I understood in 2010, the day I walked through the gates for the last time, I understood, that's it. That bit's gone. Now what follows can be different.
You say that, but you were also a media personality as a member of Parliament. You were your popularity was way higher than most. So did you use that to help you politically, for people to think, oh, that's Anna's vote?
I think I realised fairly early on that the way of the future was going to be through the media, and that politicians would need to become engaged. Now, That's in complete contrast to my attitude to social media, because I can see that that's the future, and I can see that plain as day. I also know that the reason why I will never have tens of thousands of people following my Substack is precisely because I won't advertise it on social media. So I don't do any social media. I don't do X, I don't do Facebook, I don't do any of it. And so I can see that's the future, but I reject it. When I was in Parliament, I could see that the future was reality television, and I accepted it because, with discrimination, was the programmes I accepted. But I accepted it because my belief was I could use it to enhance politics. Yeah.
With Strictly, I mean, it was just the promo shot that they did of you, and you thought, what made you say yes? What was it about Strictly that made you say, do you know what, I'm going to wear the dress as the fake tan, I
did not wear the fake tan. I didn't do the fake tan, I didn't do the false eyelashes, I didn't do the hair pieces. I was a nightmare, actually. And I insisted every time I was wearing a dress, which was most of the weeks, I absolutely insisted that I had knee-length matching leggings, because I knew there'd be a wardrobe malfunction at some point. So, I mean, I did make my own stipulations very, very, very clear, and didn't do everything that Strictly does. And in fact, my very first reality show was with something called Fit Club, where people lost weight. And I said right at the start of that, I will never do anything that I don't want to do, and I'm only going to contract to do this programme if you agree with that. So they agreed with it. And I'm very glad that clause was in the contract, because in the second episode they said, well, we're going swimming. So I said, well, you maybe. There was absolutely no way I was going to appear in my swimming costume in front of 10 million people on. I just wasn't going to do it.
Do you know, well, we're talking about fashion, but your shoes, we need to make sure they're in the shop, because you get asked all the time.
About these shoes particularly, yeah.
People love them, and they want to know where you got them from. Can they still get them? Which I don't believe they can.
They can't, sadly. I have a very tiny foot. It's either a 2.5 or a 3, depending on the make. And there used to be a shoe shop in London, in York Street, which was called the Little Shoe Shop, and its biggest size was a 3.5, I think. And I could get any shoe I wanted, fashion shoe, plain shoe, anything I wanted in my size. And I came upon these there, so I bought them. I now wish I'd bought a second pair to keep in reserve. And every time I've worn them, people say to me, oh, where did you get those shoes? But sadly, because I suggested to the owner of the shoe shop, it's not there anymore, it's gone online, I suggested to the owner of the shoe shop that he should get, I think it's an Italian make, he should get that firm to make more, because people were loving them. But anyway, they didn't.
I think he's zooming in right now. This is just going to frustrate more people that they can't get them. But with Strictly, Anton, I mean, I feel if you're a celebrity, you're going to want to be partnered with Anton. He's the most charming, fun individual that knows the world of dance. So were you hoping to get Anton before you'd even said yes to the show?
I'm now going to tell you that I had never watched the show. I'd seen excerpts. I mean, nobody could get away with not seeing John Sargent in that famous excerpt. I'd seen excerpts, but I'd never seen a whole show, so I didn't know. I didn't even know who Anton was. And when we went on the show, you're not partnered until the end of the first show. And when we went on, everybody said to me, oh, you want Anton. And I said, well, which one's Anton? I hadn't a clue who Anton was. And in fact, I was partnered in the trial show with Vincent Simone. Because we were almost exactly the same height. He's only just a couple of inches bigger, whereas Anton's tall. I thought, oh, that's who they're going to put me with.
They didn't.
I know, they put me with Anton, yeah.
Do you know what I loved? But even before the live show, everybody had the same expectation between you and Craig, because we all know Anne's not going to sit there and take what he says. But then we're all thinking, how is Craig going to react to someone giving it back? But it just worked.
He was delighted. I mean, I think they were delighted when they got me, because I was the first politician to do it. And they know that you can be as rude as you like to a politician. They'll just be rude back. They're not going to burst into tears. So they tested that. I mean, they called me a Dalek in drag and a dancing hippo and the Ark Royal. At one point, Len Goodman even compared us to hemorrhoids because he said you always come back and it's always more painful than ever. So, so we expected it. We had fun with it.
There is a 10-minute montage on YouTube of just you and Craig.
Really?
And it's so fun because...
You must send me that.
I will. Yeah. And he's there and he's ready to grill you and he looks at you and that smirk and he breaks character, and it was so nice to see. And it was actually the first time we all saw Craig and we were like, he's actually got a fun side.
Craig is not his job is to be the hard man on that show. That's his job. And that's the role he plays, and he is playing a role. He is not like that in normal life. He's very encouraging in normal life. He'll make suggestions. Why don't you do the X? And why don't you do the Y? And he's completely different. And
he's a good friend of yours.
Well, we're in touch from time to time. Yeah.
So let's talk about some various dances, because there were times Anton was dragging you around the floor and then spinning you, and then you were dressed, it was almost like a bird.
Big bird, I call that dress.
When
big bird.
Some of the dresses were presented to you, did you just go, oh my, really? Or were you happy about it?
I only used a veto once, and that was in Paso Doble week, when they had this wonderful Spanish dress, this red and gold Spanish dress. It was fantastic. But they wanted me to wear this huge black shawl with it. And I said, it makes me look like an advertisement for Scottish widows. No, I'm not going to wear that. And I didn't, and they did a little red cape instead. But that was the only week I actually used a veto. I mean, for the rest, I just went along with it. It was fun.
And it was Anton's reaction when he would do things, or he'd go, he couldn't wait for it to be over. But the public really bought into you both. And I still to this day would say you're the most iconic, legendary contestant on Strictly.
Well, they always show excerpts of whenever they do anything on Strictly. That Blackpool excerpt of me being spun round in that big yellow dress is the one that they always do.
Would you, if they ever did an All-Stars, would you go back with Anton?
I went back for one Christmas show. When I did it, I was 63. I'm now 77, and there is an enormous difference in physical capability. And even when I went back to do the Christmas show, I mean, I let him drag me and drop me and do all the things, but I said to him, the one thing you mustn't now do, Anton, is to yank hard, because, it hurts. Your muscles are much less flexible when you're older. So I said, you can take me by the arm, but don't yank, don't pull, it won't work. And he didn't. He's a very good professional. But now, at this age now, I don't think I could do it.
And rightly so. He's a judge now.
He's a judge
where
now.
he belongs. Another thing you did, you were an agony aunt, which a lot of people I would never consider Anne Widdecombe an agony aunt.
Oh, yes, but you know what it was called, don't you, that
No.
It was called Buck Up.
Oh, okay, now there's some context. That makes more sense.
That was The Guardian,
And I like that you were a guest host on Have I Got News For You, and it seemed that you really liked the show. You were able to have some wit. There was quick wit between Ian and everybody else.
I really enjoyed it the first time I did it. Really enjoyed it. And came out saying I could do that every week. I really enjoyed it. Second time I did it, I did not enjoy it. Jimmy Carr was on the panel. He was vulgar, and I didn't enjoy it at all. And I came out saying the exact opposite, which is I don't think I'll be doing that again. And indeed, they never have asked me again.
Was that because of Jimmy Carr? You didn't want to?
Oh, it was horrible. It was just vulgar. I don't do a stream of vulgarity. I just don't do it.
So no Jimmy Carr concerts for you then, that's for sure. I mean, you did Boyzone, which that story yesterday was amazing, because we'll go into Big Brother later, but you were in there with Shane Lynch, and after the show you ended up going to a Boyzone concert.
Under deep protest. What actually happened was that Shane Lynch and I were both on Big Brother, and my niece had to write one of the letters. Now, this is a bit of the nonsense that we get these days. So much emotion over these letters from home. We'd been in the show, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, home sent a letter. And I thought, I do hope she doesn't slop and slush. And she didn't. She wrote me a letter exactly as I would have wanted. But then she said, cheeky so-and-so, she actually said, I see Shane Lynch is on the programme with you. Can you get me some tickets to Boyzone? And of course, this was all on air, so Shane Lynch didn't have much choice but to say yes. But he insisted that I went. And it was the last thing I wanted to do. I took earmuffs with me. And I never wanted to go to a rock concert, and I never want to go to another one. There was nothing wrong. I'm not saying anything rude about Boyzone, but I just didn't want to be in a rock concert.
Shane might be in touch because they're actually doing a reunion tour, so you never know.
I'm sure my niece would love to go, but not me. Yeah.
What made you say yes to Celebrity Big Brother? Because that was a show I didn't expect you to say yes to.
No, I'd said no many times. I had said I wouldn't do it for £1 million, and I just didn't want to do it. And when I changed agent a few years before Big Brother, I said to my new agent, Andrew Wilson, I said, Andrew, whatever else you bring me, there are two words I never want to hear. One is big and the other is brother. I don't care what they pay, I don't want to do it. It's horrible, it's voyeuristic, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he then approached me in 2017 and he said, now, let me get to the second sentence. And I said, oh, you're not going to say Big Brother. And he explained that they were doing it, they were doing something completely different because it was 100 years of women's suffrage. And they actually wanted to call it, the channel wouldn't agree, they wanted to call it Big Sister. And it was going to emphasise all the sort of the history of women's suffrage, etc., and have some serious debates. So I said, oh, yeah, I'll pull my other toe, that's not going to happen. And Andrew said, he said, look, you're not in the jungle, you're not in Australia, you're in Elstree. You can walk out. You won't get paid if you walk out, you can walk out. And I think both I know I did, but I think also the entire production team were expecting me to walk in the first week. And in fact, my competitive instincts kicked in. And I thought, no, I'm going to go with this. And I lasted right up to being the runner-up, which came as a huge surprise to all of us.
It did, because when you entered the house, you were greeted with boos from the crowd. It wasn't a good reaction, and I thought, okay, she's going to be out very early on. But then people really liked the fact that you said it as it is, but you were very fair. You were fair, and you built some great relationships in there. Who did you struggle with the most? Because you had some big personalities.
The winner, Shane Yannick. I really struggled with him. Now, he was the one who tried right from the start to take me on about various things, but he never did it straightforwardly. He always sought to hide behind other people. So he would say to me, Ashley feels uncomfortable, that you disapprove of her relationship with Genuine, and Jess feels uncomfortable because she knows you disapprove of people in the nude and this sort of thing. So, as it happened, on one occasion when he was saying this, Ashley was crossing in front of me. I said, Ashley, is it true that you think I make you feel uncomfortable? And she said, no, I've never said that. And then came a moment later on when Andrew Brady was really seriously rude about me and used a most improper word. And he was supposedly having a bromance with Shane Yannick, so you'd expect Shane to help him. And Andrew came, because I didn't know any of this until I saw it afterwards. Andrew came storming back in and called me up and various rude words. And Shane Yannick, instead of saying to this man with whom he was supposed to be so friendly, oh, look, I understand entirely how you feel, but, maybe it would be better if you didn't quite use that. No. He backed off because he sensed danger. He knew the public would turn against him. He backed off and he said, I don't think you should call anybody a X and a Y. And when I saw it back, I thought, you coward. You coward.
You think that was to win the public over?
Yeah.
Yeah. And India Willoughby was also in the house as well. And you did clash at times.
We did.
What was it about India that you struggled to just connect with?
She was so determined right from the start. She played it badly and she was the first out. She was just determined right from the start to be melodramatic about her transition from being a man to being a woman. And Amanda Barry misgendered her, said he or something. And she got furious. And Amanda said, well, she was sorry, she didn't mean to do that, blah, blah, blah. And India would not accept the apology. She just went on and on and on, about how offended she was. And I said to her, look, Amanda said sorry, what else do you want? Oh, that's not enough. Anyway, the public didn't like it. The public don't actually like that sort of thing. The other thing is the public like Amanda Barry.
Yes.
I mean, she's a very, very kind soul, and she was an old lady. She was 83 or something. And she had done it completely by accident. And I think the public just thought, oh, you fool, India. I know, just leave it. Anyway, she was first out as a result.
Did you know you've become one of the most popular memes on the internet? So the moment when you were, trying to straighten your hair and you couldn't, and that is now shared on a daily basis. And it's normally used with a quote when the week starts and it's a tough week. And it was a meme of you trying to do your hair. And I see it everywhere. And you probably are not aware that to this day, that's still so popular.
No, I mean, I don't do social media. So,
Yeah.
I mean, no, I don't. I mean, it was hilarious. I did realise at the time. I thought, oh dear, this is going to look very stupid. I did realise at the time, but it was quite hilarious to do.
So what's next for you now? Because you've done, I mean, we were talking about this sugar-free farm, which I believe was pitched to you and Peter Davison completely differently.
I thought it was going to be a much more serious programme than it was. I also thought we were going to learn about sugar. Whereas, in fact, I found the dietitian quite hopeless when I asked questions.
And you had Gemma Collins on there as well, so that
And
was
we
an
had
experience.
Gemma Collins, which wasn't exactly restful on the ears.
So what's next for you now? Have you got any kind of TV projects coming up that you can tell us about?
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment at all. It's been a massive change this year. Right up to the beginning of this year, I was writing, as I have been for over 20 years, weekly for The Express. And that came to an end, allegedly because of economies. And I no longer have a regular contact with GB News. So this year has been quite a change. So I'm now writing a very small column and a fairly light-hearted column for Best magazine, which I write every week. And I do bits and bobs of media, but I've no big projects on at the moment.
Do you struggle with that? Because you've always had something to kind of get your teeth sunk into. So is this a kind of a bit of a, what do I do now?
That is why I set up a Substack. I wanted still to contribute to the public forum in debate. And if I wasn't going to be able to do it through a weekly newspaper column, then I had to find a means of doing it. So I went for a Substack, which is, of course, social media, but I don't do anything around it. I don't share it on other things because I don't do other things. But so at least, I can get my frustrations down.
Yeah.
There, yeah.
And you've done a lot of writing and also your own books as well about your life. How nerve-wracking is that for you to have to sit down and put everything about you out there for the public to read? I
know, I enjoy writing.
You do?
I mean, of all the work that I do, politics, television, writing, I enjoy writing the most. Now, perversely, it's the one I spend the least time on because of the demands of the others. But it is actually the one that I enjoy most. And I always thought that my retirement, I mean, I couldn't have foreseen Strictly and what that started. I mean, Strictly went to a live tour, went to a pantomime, went to the Royal Opera House. I mean, I couldn't have foreseen that. And what I had imagined that my life would be like after retiring was I'd buy a house on Dartmoor, which I have, and I would write every day. Well, chance would be a fine thing.
Well, you had some time in between going to Elstree and the Big Brother house, the sugar-free farm, the being on Strictly pantomimes and everything else.
But I was writing for The Express.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, with Craig, did you guys ever do like a panto together after Strictly?
Yes, we did 2 pantomimes. What happened was that because I lasted 10 weeks out of the 12 on Strictly, they asked me to do the tour, the live tour. And I initially said no because Anton doesn't do it. He does his own tour with Erin. He doesn't do the Strictly tour. And I said, no, come on, I can't see myself dancing with anybody else. And they said, well, we hope you'd agree to dance with Craig Revel Horwood. So we went on tour dancing together every night. And at the end, he loved it because he was getting standing ovations every night instead of being booed because of his rude comments. He was getting all these standing ovations. And at the end of the tour, he asked me to go into pantomime with him. So I was in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs for the next 2 years. And that was with Craig. And then I did pantomime for other companies after that.
Well, Anne, I've got to say, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. And just, it was nice to talk about politics, not too much in depth, but also the media side as well. And you know, it was good that I could ask you the questions that the public would want, not too intrusive either. So thank you for coming on the show, giving us your time and showing off your very fancy shoes and your jumper that matches Shane's shirt, which we love.
Ah, right.
Thank you so much. Anne Widdecombe, thank you.